Dublin, good morning. Consumer Goods Forum, thank you for being here at this very first special session. And it's also good to see you all in 3D this time and being physically together. The Consumer Goods Forum is all about retailers and consumer goods companies working together to better serve consumers, better lives for better business. And this is exactly what we will be focusing on today, with a focus on the pivotal role of data, and notably consumer data and intelligence. I'm privileged to be here on stage with my colleague Bhavesh Unadkat and Alec Owens of Unilever. My name is Kees Jacobs. I'm globally responsible for everything data, AI, analytics for consumer products and retail companies at Capgemini. Alec, quick intro from your end.
I head up what we call our People Data Center at Unilever, or PDC, which I'll explain a little bit more about later.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I head up our brand marketing and content services at Frog, which is a creative agency, part of Capgemini.
And after some initial presentations of the three of us, you will also meet Stefan Bolsius, Chief Customer Officer at Unilever Europe and Nutrition, but he'll introduce himself a bit later. Okay, so consumer intelligence, that is nothing new. I mean, in the 90s, ECR, it was all about understanding and anticipating consumer behaviors. But of course, the big difference is that the consumer signals have changed. And the ability to anticipate on those signals where consumers are meandering across a whole range of physical and digital touch points is giving new opportunities. And the sheer size of data is enormous. 4.5 billion consumers worldwide online, more than 100,000 Google searches a second, more than 200 Instagram photos, more than 12,000 Twitter feeds a second, and over 30% of consumers that leave ratings and reviews and likes and preferences. So there's no lack of data here. But the question is, how do we tap from this data? And if we look forward, it's not just about connected consumers, it is also about connected products, it's about connected homes, it's about connected physical and digital world, metaverse. Things that the number of data sources will only explode. Still, let's be honest to each other and really ask ourselves the question, do we really know the consumer? Do we really know them? Are we making use of these data? Or are we still in often cases using our gut feels or experiences from the past or traditional consumer market research? That's the question that we need to ask. Are we leveraging all these data points and turn them into meaningful insights at the point of action, not just in marketing and consumer engagement, but also in product development, in sales, retailer CPG collaboration, in supply chains, quality, innovation, research and development. So are we really doing that is a open question. And I'll give some examples where we see that there is a gap. For example, if we look at one audience that is actually not accounted for at all, which are people with some form of disability, physical disability, let alone mental disabilities. This is a huge group, 15% of world population. It's nearly 1 billion. It's nearly population of China, of people that make different choices. That look more at ease of purchase than anything else. Not that price is unimportant for them, but they make different they have different needs and often unmet needs here. So do we truly understand them? And by the way, this is not a small group. I mean, the spending power of this group is enormous. And the question is, are we as an industry truly understanding them and serving them in the best way? Another example, if we look at the current inflation, do we truly understand how consumers are reacting and why are they reacting like they do? Like Walmart's saying that there are very diverse reactions. On the one hand, consumers trading down on grocery items, and then at the same time, higher priced goods are enjoying growth as well. Why is that? Do we truly understand that? As Capgemini, we have launched yesterday a big research on food waste. And also there, we see a big disparity between what consumers are doing versus what the industry thinks. We did a lot of social and search analytics, had a panel of 10,000 consumers, and also interviewed 1,000 execs of our industry. And we see that consumers are behaving differently, but that the industry is underestimating their behaviors. And for example, that where industry executives told us that they think like 3 out of 10 consumers really would switch to a brand who is taking care of reducing food waste, consumers were very clear that 8 out of 10 will do that. And you see it 80% of increase year over year on searches that have to do with food waste. People want to know, how can I preserve goods longer, for example. Of course, we see it all over the place. And the disruptions that we've seen and are in right now make people think. And the decisions they used to make are not always the same. And they are heavily influenced in their social networks, in their virtual social networks. And they make different choices. So the monogamous relationship that consumers used to have more with the brands they loved, it's changing. It's becoming much more multi-brand in their choices. So overall, my point is there is a disparity between the needs, the also unmet needs of consumers, their triggers, their barriers, the occasions in their daily living versus what the industry thinks this is all about. This is an opportunity for companies individually, but definitely for retailers and consumer goods companies together. This is where Bhavesh will further elaborate on.
Thank you, Kees. So we've been talking about data collaboration for many years. Anyone who's been a part of the Consumer Goods Forum or been here before, it's been a massive topic around if we collaborate together with our data, we can serve the consumer better, we can grow as our brand, FMCG brands, and we can drive more sales and penetration through retail. And it's been great to see lots of progress happening in this space. So I've seen lots of good examples of data joining in a privacy-friendly way. I've seen brands advertising together, so collaborative advertising. We've seen insights that have been taken to find opportunities in the market, whether it be growth in e-commerce or whether it be focusing on meal kits, for example, which is one I was involved in. However, if we look back at the conversation that's been going on for 4 or 5 years now, it doesn't feel as though we've reached the scale we would have hoped for. It's not become common practice like we would have hoped for. And there's still many barriers that we're seeing that's kind of stopping that from happening. And I just wanted to share some of those with you, and also some suggestions for what maybe could be done, especially as we look forward and some of the stuff Kay spoke about, which is it's only going to get more complicated when you start adding in connected homes and the metaverse and new currencies. This landscape will get more complicated. So if we set the foundation now, it will help us cope with those spaces. So in terms of some of those barriers, I think the first one is around top-to-top commitment. So we have many joint business plans across FMCG and retail, but this is a very different type of joint business plan that's needed. One that's the handshake at the top, that this is a strategic priority for us. We will invest, put the right people forward, and give this the focus and attention that it needs to succeed. That links to the next point, which is around prioritization and investment. This is game-changing strategic stuff. It will take a long time to do. Results won't be quick to have. And then there's a fine balance, isn't there, between we're limited with resources. There's the transactional part of our business to focus on. Sales is always the big focus. But if you don't invest in this, then you'll fall behind. And the third one, probably the biggest one I've seen, is how you set up for success. So typically, you're putting together the commercial teams from the FMCG and the commercial teams from the retail together with a hope that they will figure it out while they do their day job. And the problem is, this is a different skill set. It's project work. It requires a different level of strategic thinking. You need more skills than just commercial skills. You need capacity, skills, capabilities in the right way to bring those forward. And then you've got the two different brands working together where there is, trust, needs to be won over. There is concern about I'm handing over my data, whether it goes over to one party or another, whether it goes into a clean room. There's still a big concern about how that data is handled, managed, and where the liability sits. And third of all, there is the challenge of knowing where to start and what to progress with. So if you're going into brand new spaces around partnering on a meal kit, for example, how do you know what good looks like? How do you know when results need to be achieved by? And these are some of the barriers that we're seeing. So just in terms of sharing what I think some of the key changes in behavior need to be to drive the strategic relationships. Also linking back to some of the stuff Kay said. So the first one I think is, when I look at some of these joint business plans, or when I look at the metrics of success, they're still very commercial. They're all about category growth, brand growth, consumer activation, versus when do we start thinking about consumer-led KPIs? When do we start thinking about empathy or kind of brand affinity or accessibility? Going back to one of Casey's points, I think the metrics need a real complete shift. And that's not just in the collaboration space. I think that also applies individually in your brand space. The second one is moving from connecting to collaborating. And what I mean by that is we're putting squads of people together from both sides of the fence, and they're going in together, and they're doing stuff. They're sharing a bit of data. It's fairly tactical, or it's kind of limited to capacity. So how do we now move into a space of collaboration? And I think that collaboration also needs to go from FMCG and retail also into thinking about how you collaborate with your competitors, because we're all trying to build similar capabilities. We're all trying to work out when our products as an FMCG are connected and we're fulfilling those through a retailer or a distributor network, how does that work? What does it look like? If we can share some of those capabilities, even at a competitor level, I think it will be mutually beneficial. And the third one is moving from BAU to strategic. So one of the points I made earlier was about commercial teams are doing this as a part of their side job, on top of their day job. Thinking about this as really strategic, setting it up as a separate program of work, like we would with any strategic program of work. And also thinking about the role of an independent partner or an independent vendor. When you're thinking about data exchanging or you're thinking about driving programs of work, I think it's largely beneficial that there is a level of independence involved that can drive mutual conflict resolution and drive mutual growth. On that note, I'd like to hand over to Alec, who's going to talk about how Unilever have been using data and data partnerships to drive value into their retailer network.
Thank you, Bhavesh. So I'll talk a little bit about Unilever's people data center. Don't be fooled by the people part. The amount of times on LinkedIn, I must admit, I get invited to HR forums. It's very much people in the consumer and the customer sense. And look, we've been on this journey at Unilever for probably about the last 8 years or so, and I'm sure everybody in the audience is going through a massive digital transformation that just continues to evolve, and it continues to accelerate, especially if you look at COVID and the impact COVID has had on probably every business here, and the way the consumers are now interacting with the digital environment much more than they probably ever have done previously to that as well. And so at Unilever, we set up basically 3 elements to help us, I guess, survive and to succeed and to accelerate our growth in the digital space. The first, people data centers. I will come on, explain a little bit more about that in a second. Our U Studio, which is basically our in-house agency, which thankfully won Campaign's In-House Agency of the Year last year, which is amazing. They've done something like 35,000 projects internally. We have 1.5 million digital assets that we can then use and recycle across our marketing activities. And then digital marketing commerce hubs is something that I set up at Unilever maybe about 5 years ago. We're now in version 2 of that, I would say, which is how do we better integrate our digital commerce end-to-end, so both the strategy, innovation, as well as the execution in the media side, our digital marketing elements, and then finally media end-to-end, putting these all under one hub, under one leader, to enable us to accelerate the growth that we need to do within digital, but equally upskill many of our marketers who, in many cases, are still your traditional marketer who understands how to make brilliant TV advertising, less so in the digital space itself. So we basically set up the People Data Center to enable us to listen, to listen to our consumers across all the digital footprint that they leave, which is significant, which I'll come on to a second. How do we analyze that data? But more importantly then, how do we use that data then engage, to understand and engage with the consumers, hopefully better than anybody else in the industry as well. Now, equally, it is important to note that, this one first, sorry. The BDC, so what is a BDC? It consists of basically 3 pillars. Social and business analytics, so how do we extract all the data that we get through the digital footprint, but then combining that with traditional data, such as your sales transaction data, your traditional research that you get through. Our consumer engagement centers or call centers, you might be saying, why the hell are these guys under there? Well, they're a source of information. You know, our consumers are consistently calling us, not to complain, but to come back with millions of ideas about how we can improve our products. And it's actually a great data asset that we can then use in our insights to then drive value back for the consumer and Unilever, and hopefully the customers too. And the third element is all the data-driven marketing that I look after as well, which is under the data, the digital marketing commerce hubs. But the PDCs, we set this up, said about 8 years ago. We now do it across 28 different languages across the globe, which is quite complex when you're trying to translate certain things and use new technologies, new capabilities such as natural language processing. We get about 1 billion posts from Instagram a day. Now that's picture-based. Now what we then have to do is we have to translate those pictures into text to extract the insight to then use in our marketing collateral. We get tons of ratings and reviews, and I think Case mentioned it himself. Ratings and reviews is a new data source, which is a huge value to the organization. You know, in the past, you would launch a new product, you would have to wait 6 months to see whether or not that product was working or not working in the consumer's eyes. Now, instantly, the day after, you can start to see what the reviews that we're getting. Now, it is important because we know there's lots of fake reviews out there. So having the capability to identify when it's bots or when it's not authentic, and similarly for things like influencer marketing and such like as well. And we have something like, 200 million or so addressable data now, which we can then use in our marketing to directly target our consumers, and about 2 billion digital IDs, so the data that you get back from things like cookies and such like as well. Now, it is important that whenever you use data, whatever you're getting from the consumer, that you do use it in a safe, responsible and ethical way. And at Unilever, we apply similar standards across our organization, which are in line with GDPR, which is probably the strictest form of regulation when you're using a consumer's data, whether you're in Thailand, whether you're in India, or whether in the US. Why? Because we're a global organization, and therefore all you need is to do the wrong thing with the consumer data in a market where the regulation is slightly more relaxed, but ultimately the reputation of Unilever will be damaged if we do the wrong thing, irrespective of the market in which we operate. And so it is vitally important that if you want to use your consumer's data, you need to retain the trust of your consumer to continue using it and reassure them that the value they get from giving you the data far exceeds any issues that you might experience through trust. So I just basically want to spend a little bit of time talking through some examples that we've done. Now, we set up the PDC initially to be much more of a marketing-faced organization. But over the last couple of years working with Stefan and many of the people within our customer development team at Unilever, we realized the competitive advantage we had in the marketing sense through the PDC can also benefit our customers a great deal as well. I used to work in a retailer before I joined Unilever, so I understand both sides of the fence, so to speak. But so therefore, we identified the capabilities that we built through the PDC to help us know where to sell for our customers, how to get more shoppers in store, so more transactions, get more from shoppers when they're in store, how do we build margin within the basket, and more importantly, how do we as Unilever win with more of our customers at delivering and collaborating with them on some of the capabilities that we had built. So basically I just want to take you through 4 very quick examples. First one is how do we know where to sell, and how do we then win on the shoppers in health and beauty channel. They've all been sensitized and debranded for very good reason, but you might guess where some of them might come from. Another one's about how do we then expand brick and mortar in click and collect, especially post-COVID, because the behaviors of consumers have changed. Third one is around sustainability. How do we then better support the sustainability agenda of both Unilever and our customers? And then the final one is about how do we drive growth through basket building. So the first one was basically, it was a German retailer, and seen that actually a German retailer in the health and beauty channel, and what they'd realized is through COVID, that actually many of the German shoppers were actually doing a one-stop shop. That impacted smaller health and beauty channels because they were going to bigger retailers to do the one shop rather than doing multiple shops, because most people were either at home or restricted in terms of the amount of time they could spend out of home. And so basically, this the work that we've done with the health and beauty retailer to help them rethink about how they can then get shoppers back in store, using all the social data, using all the search data that we have, using all the ratings and review data to better understand their consumer. And so effectively, leveraging that data enabled us to then understand store individualization. So how do they best, what is it a consumer is looking for when they're shopping in the health and beauty channel? Helping them real-time category management, understanding how consumers were purchasing, where they were purchasing, and how they were purchasing the products, and really understanding what's the triggers and barriers to them actually going back to a health and beauty channel rather than just doing the main shop within a big retailer. It was a huge data partnership that we did with the retailer and ourselves, and actually it managed to accelerate and actually increase the transactions of consumers back into store as well. The second example was really understanding the pace of technological change. I'm sure many of us are experiencing it and feeling it within the environments in which we operate. But actually through COVID, as I said, click and collect became a big thing for many of the consumers. So they were doing the shop online, going to the retailer, normally in a car park, picking up the groceries and going home. And there was one big retailer, big brick and mortar retailer in the US, that were really struggling because they were losing a lot of share to pure play retailers, so pure play retailers like an Amazon. And therefore they wanted to understand how can we then better secure these consumers to come to our store through click and collect. We did multiple pieces again, using all the capability and using all the data that we had, but we actually used that data not only to help them understand, I guess, by state within the US how the shoppers were shopping, but actually then using and combining our first-party data with their first-party data to make sure we had the right content and the right media against that content to drive people to store. And again, we saw a huge advantage in terms of shopper transactions, and ultimately helped them really understand, not only collectively as a retailer, but individually as a state, how they could best secure those consumers back into their stores. Third one, obviously, Unilever Sustainability is a large part of what we do. You know, make sustainable living commonplace is something that's been our mission for the last 100 years or so. But equally, what are the categories in which consumers are really looking for sustainable choices? And what times of year, I guess, can you use your marketing to better attract consumers to those products? So effectively, we worked with a couple of UK retailers, big retailers in the UK. It'll probably give you a hint as to whom they are, to basically build together sustainability moments to understand what were the products where consumers were willing to pay more and actually get an advantage from a sustainable product. And similarly, understanding those events throughout the year, which you can then better target those consumers with those products to drive the value back for the retailer, but also for us as Unilever as well. And this was a huge success now because it gives marketers the opportunity to identify what to activate within their campaigns and when to better attract those consumers. And the final one is basically how do we then again similarly use our consumer data, both from the digital footprint, but also the first-party data that we collect through the campaigns that we run. We did it to try and increase category growth in deodorants for Dove. So how do we take a Dove Beauty consumer, but translate them into Dove deodorants as well. So you might have heard the word clean rooms. I think it was Case and Bhavesh both mentioned it. Clean rooms are a big phenomenon that have happened probably over the last few years. Now, for those that might not know, a clean room effectively is a safe haven where as a customer, you can put your data, and as a retailer, we can put our data, we can bring it together, match it anonymously, but then take that data out of that environment and then use that data to then target consumers through our retail media to better support the customer agenda. Now, we did this by building 4 segments, very targeted segments for Dove buyers, and then working with the retailer using their first-party data as well to better target those consumers, to drive transactions. Now, it was you could argue, a small campaign initially, but it allowed us to not only generate incremental growth to the category of about 100,000, but generated an incremental 2 million, it should be euros, not dollars actually, 2 million euros through the precision segments that we used in order to target. So that's just some examples of the stuff that we've done at Unilever through the PDC. And as Case mentioned at the beginning, one thing that we can probably all say, we do know our consumers and know our consumers pretty well. But with the growth of the digital data that's coming through, that gives us another advantage to understand how can we extract that data, combine that data with our traditional data that we'd collect through transactions, etc., but then use that to better target the consumers. And as Bhavesh says, we're very good at collaborating, but normally on the vertical, not so much on the horizontal. And I think how can we then go beyond your traditional JBPs and really collaborate to drive the change that we want to see? And I think for me, a good example of that might be if you're blind, walk into a supermarket and try and find your shampoo and conditioner. You can't, because they're generally the same bottle and the same size. Not only that, try and find a product which is a deodorant and sometimes a body spray. Again, exact same products. Imagine if you're deaf. How do we communicate to our deaf consumers? It's not easy. And equally, we all know there's a lot of people who are disabled, but how many of us can truly put our hand on heart and say that we drive the change that we want to see in an environment where 15% of your shoppers have some form of disability? You need to be able to cater for them, not only in the store, but also in the products you provide. And ultimately, we believe the People Data Center at Unilever gives us that advantage to be able to truly understand our consumers, but not only from the data point of view, but to use that data to better target our consumers, to drive value for them, drive value for us, and ultimately drive value for you. So we're going to pass over to Case, and we're going to invite Stefan to the stage because we have some Q&A. And I'll pass over to Case, who can introduce the session. Case.
Thank you. Thank you, Alec. Thank you, Bhavesh, for your inspirations. And indeed, welcome on stage, Stefan. Maybe a quick intro.
Yeah, Steph, so for those who know me a little longer, and I think the title says it, so I look after our sales capability and customers, specifically we are now in 5 business groups. I lead the nutrition one, but I also work transversely in Europe on all our businesses.
Thank you to be here on stage. And we have been having discussions and conversations, presentations on this exact topic over the last period, and some key themes in terms of questions came up. So I will start with those questions first. If we have still time, then I would like to open the floor also for questions that you may have. So Stefan, in the context of what we just discussed, so where do you see the most valuable synergies when it comes to consumer data collaboration between the retailers and the brands, CPG brands?
I'm going to talk a little bit from what I've experienced. I mean, we've been working on the PDC for about 8 years, but we've only really started to scratch the surface on this. And I think the most obvious answer to the question you just asked is that a retailer would obviously know a lot more about the people shopping in their stores, but only on the occasions when they shop in store. When you've listened to what Alex was explaining here, you will have noticed that we know what they do when they shop in other stores, what they do on the internet, and we sort of understand the entire path to purchase. And so I think when you look for synergies, it's really about bringing that very detailed knowledge of a shopper in a retailer store together with the very macro understanding that we have of the shopper across its entire path to purchase. If you get that right, then you are able to unlock enormous opportunities, I think.
Okay, good. So a lot of synergies there. So Alec, in terms of the delta between tapping from the real-time digital footprint data of consumers compared to the traditional ways of doing consumer market research, what new capabilities does that require in terms of people, processes, and culture, technology?
Yeah, I think there's the what you do and who does it, I suppose, is probably the easiest way to describe it. I think the first thing is, in the world of digital, you get so much unstructured data through. So we get a hosepipe of Twitter data every single day. As I said, we get 2 billion data coming in from Instagram, which is pictures that we have to then translate into text. And so the traditional way of doing stuff has to fundamentally change for you to be able to extract the insight out of the data that you collect in a way that you can really drive value back into the business. Now, a large part of that is NLP, or natural language processing, which effectively allows you to condense all this information together into either sentiment or to make sense of the data that you get through. But that in itself is challenging. We do it across 28 languages. Some languages like Thai have no gaps in the language. And there are many challenges, some of which I won't say today because maybe not the best thing to say, but they can be challenging of extracting that data, translating that data, and making it into something which is actionable. But a good example might be decay. The word decay is a negative word in the English language. But equally, if you're an oral care brand, it's a positive word because the toothpaste that we provide should avoid you getting decay of the tooth. But then if you were picking up NLP, that would come through as a negative connotation, and actually it's a positive thing for the brands that we would have. So understanding that's firstly important. And then the skills that you have and need within an organization are quite different to the skills that you might have today. A couple of examples are data artists. One of my favorite people, I think, is people who are scientifically trained but also trained as an artist. They're the people who can bring the data together and visualize it in a way that you can then present the data back to the organization in a way that somebody can understand. Now, secondly, we have data storytellers within the PDC at Unilever, people who understand multiple data sets, the biases that you'll generally have within multiple data, but can take that, look at a hypothesis, and present it back to the organization in a narrative that they'll understand. So there's very much about the different data that you get, how you deal with it. Secondly, about how you then translate that into visual and compelling narrative.
So it's a different ball game in that sense, with different skills needed. So Bhavesh talked about the collaboration and also hurdles in the collaboration, and the delta between what can be done versus what is the practice right now. So, from your practice, what do you see, Stefan, as the biggest hurdle, and also what's the best way to overcome that?
It's a journey, that's for sure. And if I go back a few years, and actually the new projects that we start now with retailers with whom we haven't been doing it, initially it's always generating interest is not so difficult, because when you present these kind of case studies, people very quickly start to see the opportunity. But the amount of trust, and I think Bhavesh touched upon it when he was talking about clean rooms and things like that, and what is required to get to the next level. The trust is really in the beginning the biggest blocker, and so trying to convince people that it's okay to open up your data if you do it in the right way. Obviously setting up clean rooms and things like that. What I've noticed every single time is that once you have the commercial part and the data part convinced, usually the legal part starts being a roadblock, and then you have to have legal-to-legal conversation and usually get third-party legal support on the ground in order to unlock that. And then it's really a story where it depends on you how far you want to take it. What I see very often in the beginnings, it's like, and that's with all the respect that I own them, you see retailers that they are aware they have good data and they start to monetize it. But really it's like, here's my data, now show me that you can do something with it and pay me in the meantime X amount of money for it. It has a bit of a detrimental side effect, which is that for people like us, when you pay for data, you obviously need to first refund the data before you can actually start building business. And you very quickly end up being sort of a share taker versus a market maker. And that's something you should probably avoid at all costs. But once you get beyond that stage and the two parties understand that they have something to contribute to the equation, and you start really mixing up the data and start unraveling the insights, leveraging some of the technological tools that we have, then the amount of, I mean, like I said, we just started scratching the surface, but when you do the things that were just presented and a few others, and the one example is, they always say in our promotions, we spend 100, 50 we know is the right thing, and 50 is the wrong thing. We just don't know which 50 is the right and which is the wrong. But if you can start thinking about spending that 100 in a way like we were describing here, leveraging what we have in the digital hubs, so the audience crafters and approaching them with the right messages and the right content, all of a sudden you're going to start spending your 100 in the most effective and efficient way. And that in itself will create enormous joint value creation.
Yeah. So it's demonstrating success, and then it will flow from there. So I mean, we talked a few times on clean rooms already. So Bhavesh, what do you see as a role, but also the future role of the clean rooms, how they evolve? Any perspective on that?
Yeah, so I think as Alec described, they've been a great addition to the portfolio to help overcome on the trust side, especially when you're joining two parts of data, and they're built in a way that gives that full security. The challenge that we're actually seeing kind of, as we're working on this with Unilever is you don't want to have then multiple instances of clean rooms, and you've got to think about your total retail media. This is one part of your retail media. So I think the help that we need from the clean room vendors is taking that ecosystem approach into, you need to be a part of my campaign and my retail media. I don't need to be a part of your clean room. So that's where I think we need a bit of reversal. Great capability. Now let's integrate it in a way where the Unilevers and the retailers can drive BAU through the digital hubs in Unilever in a way that's enhancing, effective part of the business process versus having to use another platform and do something in a different way.
Thank you, Bhavesh. So, Alec, talking about consumer signals and data points. So, what do you see as the most interesting, new, and upcoming sources of data?
I was going to say, just before I answer that question, to build on the clean room thing, I think one thing that we could all benefit from is almost like a harmonization or a framework to help best understand how clean rooms operate, because at the moment we either deal with the customer's retailer's clean room, or we have another vendor that we deal with, but there are multiple vendors, and no vendor yet does it globally or can scale at the global at the scale that we need within Unilever, and so some harmonization I think would be useful. To answer your question,
maybe to react on that, maybe that's something we can look to put on the agenda of the Consumer Goods Forum as well, as a kind of a neutral driving force across the industry for those kind of frameworks on clean rooms.
Because it will help expedite the process and make it much safer and cleaner for us all, to use a pun. So in terms of data sets, look, I mean, we constantly have to evolve the data sets that come into the PDC because data sets deprecate over time. A lot of the time, sometimes for good reason. Facebook and the access to Facebook data has changed significantly from when we first set out on our journey 8 years ago. Similarly, new data sets come in, and come in at scale and fast, like ratings and reviews. But look at things like image. Image is a classic one. It probably is an older data point, but how do we then not only use static imagery that you get from the likes of Instagram, but with the meteoric rise of something like TikTok, how can you then take the data that you have within TikTok, moving imagery, and translate that in a way into text that you can then drive the insights through it? And so there are multiple examples of some good capability out there, but we're nowhere near where we need to be, I think, of truly understanding imagery coming through, whether that be static imagery from pictures or whether it be moving imagery from movies. And we've had some classic examples and some amusing times, shall we say, in terms of a computer translating something in an image to something that's certainly not what was in the image itself. But I think, but things that you mentioned as well, Case, connected homes or connected devices or, smart meters and such like. There's a lot of data out there that actually, the danger I think most organizations do, and we've done it many times within Unilever, and I've done it throughout my career in data and analytics, where you want all the data, but actually you don't know what you want the data for. And so for me, a lot of the time is there's hundreds of data points out there. It's more a case of building a clear use case of what is it we're trying to do and what value will we get by doing so, whether that be for us at Unilever or whether that be in partnership with our customers as well. And so for me, starting with a use case is more important than looking at all the data that's coming in, because there are just so many signals out there. And actually being able to use that in a way which is driving value is more important, I would say.
Thank you, Alec. And maybe building further on that, Bhavesh, what do you see as the next big thing when it comes to data collaboration between retailers and CPG companies moving forward for the next few years?
Yeah, so I think there's always kind of, if we look back in time, the retailers have always had the power of the data with the kind of the consumer data, the transactional data, and brands like Unilever have proven that more holistic consumer view, that category view, and that's driven collaboration. The topic I get most excited about is when we take the topic case you spoke about, the connected product concept, which is right now, if I need to replace one of my Unilever products, the links, I go via a retailer, either physically or digitally, and I replace it. When we scale connectivity and my links product is associated with me, there is a complete shift in ownership of consumption. Unilever will know I'm running low and I need that replaced. That will not require them to fulfill it. That will require their retailer network to fulfill it, or my retailer network to fulfill it. And that can only be done effectively if FMCG and retail are really maturing that collaboration. Because that consumer journey will get even more complicated. It will need to be even more real time. And if the brands aren't partnering effectively, the consumer will be the one that will be let down.
Thank you, Bhavesh. So, I mean, a lot of opportunity, a lot of challenges, I'm sure, as well, but definitely a lot of dynamics will come our way. So we have a few more minutes for additional questions. Is there from the audience a question given what we just discussed or given the presentations that we did at the start? Any questions? It's early, of course, but... No questions? Well, then I suggest that we will...
Because there's one thing maybe just to quickly add.
Somebody raising
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Somebody here?
So how do you then, can you give an example of how you then get it right if you have combined all the data? What do you have? So can you give an example of how you then got it right with how, like, so you got all the data, you've combined it, you put it into action, but what did you actually do to get it right? That's my question.
Yeah. So I think look, it's a great question, and sometimes you just have to try and fail. Yeah, so I think I failed more times in the last 2 years, I think, than I probably succeeded at times, but you have to fail fast. But as I said before, getting it right is understanding the outcome that you're looking to drive towards. So as I said before, putting together use cases. So what is it the customer needs through the data that we have? What is it we need through the data they have? And then pull that together in a clear use case to say, here's the interventions that we need to create for a consumer to drive value for a customer. Sounds quite simple, but it's not as simple as it might sound. But I think it is just trial and error sometimes as well. I mean, we've been partnering with Stefan and the CD team for the last couple of years, using capability we've used in a marketing sense, but translating that into the sense that it's going to be useful for a customer. And a lot of the times, it's just truly understanding the outcome that you're driving towards. So what is the value and what's the triggers that will drive that value? And then being able to clearly identify that across, I guess, a consumer experience and the interventions that you need to make across that experience to then drive the value. But getting ratings and reviews, what do you do with it when you first get it? You're like, oh, it's like, but you quickly learn, you do your analysis on that, you realize that actually if you get more than 25 reviews, then that's actually a positive reviews, that's a really good thing for a consumer. If the rating's below 4, then the product's probably going to fail. And I think it's over time, you just learn through the data sets that you have by putting that back to the value that's been generated and then understanding that through the analytics that you would do as well.
There's maybe also a second dimension to your question, which is getting the individual micro situation right and then scaling it up to something that creates impact. And what I've learned the hard way over the last couple of years is that there is no silver bullet. It's not like, let's do this and all of a sudden life will be beautiful. It's a lot of very small things that you need to trial and error. And like you say, learn fast and then get it right. But it's about doing many of those that will actually generate the impact. So it's product by product, user group by user group, finding these right combinations with the right messages at the right moment, and then scaling that. But the digitization actually allows us automation and all of that, and that's why you can get very quickly to scale as well, once you get it right. Yes,
Thank you. Yeah, question?
Thank you for all the information. Customer reviews seem to be a great source of insight coming from the consumers. Are there any examples that you could share with us that you turn that information to a value for your business?
Well, we have a product that we've built at Unilever called DVOC, which is a digital voice of the consumer. What that does is it pulls in all the ratings and reviews data that we get, but also all the data that we collect from our consumer engagement centers or call centers. That allows us to identify through the insights that we generate, through the ratings and reviews data, or through the call centers, when there's an issue in the supply chain, whether there's an issue with the product formulation or whether there's an issue with the product packaging. That allows us to quickly adapt it. Now, we've now put that into every single factory at Unilever. So all the factories, shop workers get access to what we call digital voice of the consumer. We now have eDVOC, which is the e-commerce version of it, which again, it's that data is coming in real time every single day. Now, when we say real time, we need near real time. Yeah, it's not instantaneous. It's pretty much every 24 hours. But unlocking taking the time, and it goes back to the lady's question here before, we had to build the pipes and the plumbing. Once you've built the pipes and the plumbing, you've got the data coming in, you've got the capability to then analyze that data on top. And that takes time, that takes patience in an organization. The amount of times you get asked for business cases for stuff that's just foundational. You either choose to do it, or you choose not to do it, and you choose to believe it's the future, or you choose it's not the future, and you invest or you don't invest. My advice would be to invest in it because it takes time to build the foundations. But many examples where small little things could be wrong with the product packaging, like we own a brand, Lakme in India, which is a makeup brand. The lipstick is melting in the high heat. So therefore, we know instantly we've got to then correct the formulation to stop that happening. Or there's another piece when you move into the digital commerce side, a lot of packaging issues that you might get from the transportation, either to like the likes of an Amazon or from them to the consumer. And being able to quickly identify those issues and act upon them is quite significant. But even your call centers. We get millions of ideas coming through from our call centers day in, day out. A classic example, Klondike is an ice cream brand in the US, but we only ever give single variants in packs. Why the hell wouldn't we do multiple variants in a pack? So give me strawberry, give me raspberry, give me vanilla, whatever it might be in a single pack. We never did it. But then the consumer phones up in our call center, they say it, and then having that data, being able to act upon it is quite key as well.
One thing I just add to that, I think, Alec, from your point, is any brand we look at now, data insight overload. And I think if we look at the DVOC product, Alec, you spoke about, I think why that is such a game changer is because it's trigger and alert based. So if there is an issue with a lipstick that's melting, the supply chain or factorer alerted straight away. If that alerting system didn't exist, by the time we processed all of the data, analyzed all of the data, got around to taking an action, we've probably had 2,000 or 3,000 melting lipsticks versus 2 or 3 melting lipsticks. And I think that's one of the game changers, but that's can only be enabled through all of the plumbing being kind of right in the first place.
So we're at the end of our session, or at least at the end of our time slot, and I'm sure you might like a cup of coffee before going to the next special session. One plug as a food for thought, I saw people taking pictures. Maybe you may consider taking a picture of this QR code. Very good report, at least I think so, on food waste, practices in the industry, both from a consumer lens as well as from an industry executive lens. With that, I would like to thank our speakers and panelists, and thank you for your attention. Bye-bye.